In today's show, we're talking tiers for drafting. Point guards, in particular. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free, and we are available on all platforms. It's tiers. So Matt Smith's going to come on. We're going to talk... Well, I'll let him explain what we're doing with the tiers. So we might as well just get him in right now. It's that time of year. Welcome back to the show, Matthew Smith. How are you? I forgot to do the sound. I got to do the sound. People will complain. Smitty.
Smitty.
Now, you didn't hear that, but it definitely played. Trust me.
Thank you, Josh. Good to be back, and it is that time of year again.
It is. I think, I don't know how this has happened, but I think everything is, the NBA season starts a week later than what it did last season, but all my shows seem to be pushing out a week earlier, so there's like a 2-week discrepancy somewhere in there. I don't exactly know why that is happening, but it is, and that's where we're at. So we're here. We're talking tiers, and Matt, I'm going to let you throw it. I want to throw it to you to tell us what do we mean by a tier? What's the purpose of this?
Yeah, so we use positional tiers to group players of similar overall value. Now, for these positional tiers, we're using your 8-cat per game standard league projections on Basketball Monster. And by using tiers, we can identify where there's a positional strength or scarcity. And by that, I mean, this season we'll see that center in particular is a deep position. Therefore, you can get a good starting center in the mid-rounds of drafts. And then using these positional tiers collectively can help you on draft day. So like there might be a run of big men go off the board in those mid-rounds, and then you can see in the tiers that there might be only a couple left that you want, but you also might need a small forward to assist your team, but you know you can get them later in the draft by looking at positional tiers. So it might be more beneficial, or probably is more beneficial to take that power forward or center now and wait on that small forward. And I guess just a couple of other points of housekeeping as well, or housekeeping. Tiers aren't reflective of rounds, so a player in tier 4 isn't necessarily a round 4 player. And a player in tier, let's say 3 in one position, doesn't necessarily hold the same value as tier 3 in another position. And I guess finally is please just don't get too caught up in where players are listed in terms of their positions. We've tried to list players in the positions that they will predominantly play this season. So as an example, Scotty Barnes is listed as a shooting guard in these tiers because we expect Dennis Schroeder to play point, OG Anunoby to play small forward, Pascal Siakam at power forward, and Virgil at centre. So, unless or when we hear that, we get into training camp and Toronto announce him as their full-time point guard, then I can move him across into the point guard tiers. But for the sake of the exercise, he's currently a shooting guard.
Yeah, I think that last sentence is really important for the sake of the exercise because honestly, Matt, like these positions are so fluid, they don't mean as much. It's not fantasy football where it's a running back or a wide receiver. And I hear people talk about this all the time. They go, man, well, if a center actually gets me way more assists than that positional average, it's so much more valuable. And is it? But it isn't really, because you don't have to get those centers. You could just grab another point guard and put it in utility, and then your assists go up by a lot more. Whereas this positional thing it's just not as important, especially with dual positions, which will be added in to a lot more sites as we go through. So while we're looking at this from a strict 5 shows, 5 positions, it's really not the way basketball works, and it is really just for a designation for us to go through. So if a player's not here, he's going to be in shooting guards, or we think he's shit. Either one of those two things. But more than likely, if it's someone who you think should be here, he's going to be in another area. Now, in the past, we've always strictly just done this for category leagues. I am going to throw out a little bit of points league tiering stuff when I see something that's a little bit different. I am also, as I've spoken about many times, working on a different sort of or an adjusted ranking system. Now, at the moment, what I've done is I've given this ranking system a name. It's going to be called Durant, and I'll explain that more in another show. And I am going to go through, because I've got those numbers working in the background. We are probably going to put them up on Basketball Monster at some point as an alternative, just to sort of test it through the season to see how it goes. But when my Durant rankings have guys in slightly different tiers here as well, I will mention it. There will be a show coming probably this week explaining a little bit of what that Durant stuff is. But just so you're aware that, and this is another thing I've been looking at, Matt, is that we look at tiers and we look at positions and we look at ranks and all that sort of stuff. The differences are quite narrow, that it only takes really small changes to bump guys up or down or to completely change the way we value. In fact, I tweeted it out today. If you look at the actual valuation of players, that so much at the top, like I think Jokic would be the first ranked player, then if you had the guy who's ranked fourth, the equivalent rank would be 60th based on a 500 player sample size. Like, that's how spread out this stuff is. It's minute differences that change things.
Yeah, and we're still 2 months out from the season starting, so they're going to change a whole lot more between now and the start of the season. And, people are going to disagree, and that's fine, and encourage people to move players up and down these tiers to best suit their roster coming into draft day. And I've probably only covered the sort of top 100 to top 120 players, because like you said, after that, the difference is so small, and the back end of your roster is going to change so much over the first few weeks of the season anyway.
Yeah, it's going to change a ton. And that's just how all of this stuff works all the time. And we don't have this level of introduction to all of these shows. It's just good to set the baseline of what we're talking about here. But that does bring us into the point guard tiers. Now, Matt said you base this on some of my projections I did a few weeks ago. Stuff is adjusted, but he's also chucked a little bit of his own flavor into it. And I think people might, I don't know if people will be surprised, but when we get to tier 1, which we're going to do right now for point guards, you've just got old mate Luka Doncic sitting there by himself, which again, some people I think might be a little bit surprised at. As people can see on the screen, I've got the ADPs next to it, and that is Yahoo, Fantrax, ESPN in that order. So ADP of 3, 3, and 2. I have absolutely no problem with Luka being here by himself, but there will be people, Matt, who say, well, why isn't Shea in this area? Or what about Luka's turnovers or his free throw percentage? Why have you got him sitting here at number 1?
So those asking, we've got Shea in shooting guard tiers because Josh Giddey is the point guard, the main point guard in Oklahoma. But for me, Luka is my third player on the board after Jokic and Joel Embiid. We know Luka, nightly triple-double threat. The field goal percentage last year jumped dramatically. Steals increased as well. The free throw is a little bit of concern, but I don't believe it's a big as concern as people make it out to be. And yeah, he took a small hit with the arrival of Kyrie Irving last season, but not enough for me to draft him out of the top 5. And like I said, I've got him at number 3 on my board currently.
Yeah, he did take a bit of a hit. The assist rate did drop playing with Kyrie. Now, people say that pairing didn't work. It did. They were +6 per 100 possessions in the time they were together, so we can't write that off. But his assist rate did take a little bit of a hit. I don't really think there's too much of a concern with having him sitting here in this tier alone. Again, I am going to reference it in my Durant rankings. I do have 2 other guys that are in that tier 1 alongside him. So that's something to bear in mind. I don't think there's any real argument, Matt, for Luka going at any spot from 2 through to 6. Really, I don't think you could argue either way on that.
No, I don't think there's any argument either. And still coming into the prime of his career, doing some great things in the FIBA World Cup as well. Another great season's in store for Luka.
We're going to get into tier 2 in just a second, but before we do that, I do have to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app, it's easy to use, and you can be on everything from spreads to player props and more. Just that great offer if you are not even a new member, an existing member, to get that $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket. That makes it worthwhile there as well, and put all of your other knowledge to the test. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season with an offer that you won't want to miss. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. Matt, that brings us into tier 2. Of course it does, because that's what comes directly after tier 1. And we're sitting there with Tyrese Haliburton, and I guess maybe that's the name I should have brought up instead of Shea before. That people would say, well, why isn't Tyrese in tier 1 alongside Luka? And I can sort of get the argument. His ADP is 6 on Yahoo, 6 Fantrax, 10 ESPN. 10 on ESPN's insane. Like, that's obviously ludicrous. Why have you given a little bit of a delineation here between these two?
I mean, it's really close, and we're sort of talking about, like I said, Luka in the top 3 or 4, and Tyrese Haliburton, I'd probably have it at 4 or 5 in that 6 range. So it's very, very small margins. I guess Tyrese, the biggest difference in them is the scoring. Luka's at sort of 30, 31 points per game. Tyrese Haliburton's probably going to be in the low 20s, but both got great threes. Tyrese Haliburton's unbelievable assists. He was second overall in assists per game last season and top 5 in total assists. Should replicate that again this season. The amazing efficiency, the great steals. So we are splitting hairs, but probably just have a little bit more confidence in Luka in that top 3 and Tyrese Haliburton right behind him.
Yeah, look, I think that's fair enough. Where Haliburton needs to get better is just more usage and getting to the free throw line more. Can he do it? I don't know. Like, that's going to be the big question. Like, we saw him take big steps up last season, played a lot of minutes. Usage did increase, and assist rate was up, and steal rate was really high. But does he have an extra gear? And it's hard to write a bloke off who's like 23 or whatever he is. But you do see what his game is, and you think, can he ever be like, I am a 28 usage player? And I'm not really sure that he can be necessarily.
Yeah, and I guess that's, like you said, the next step to his game. And obviously, he had an injury interrupted season last year. So
injury.
Yeah, we haven't seen that full season yet of Tyrese, which we have of Luka. So, if we get a 70 to 75 game out of Haliburton this season, I'm sure we'll be talking about him in tier 1 next year.
Yeah, I think he's far off. In a points league, I think he's actually a little bit down. I think he's more of a tier 3 player. He's just not quite as impactful in a points league. It's not terrible, but compared him to where Luka sits, like maybe it's 8 fantasy points a game, which is a pretty sizable difference, and that drops him down there into tier 3 in a points league for me. In terms of the tier 3 here for category leagues, we've got 3 guys in it: LaMelo Ball, Damian Lillard, Steph Curry. You can see all their ADPs on the board. There's a pretty clear delineation between drafters where everyone's grabbing Steph first, 7, 9, and 7, whereas LaMelo is sliding into the second round on all sites, and Lillard is at the back end of the first. We're grouping them together. I agree with this, Matt. I think that Ball is being underrated. I think that Lillard's a little bit interesting because it's very hard to project him at the moment. I'll start with this. If Lillard is in Miami, does he move out of this tier, do you think?
He's probably somewhere between 3 and 4. I was trying to sort of work through this the other day and think about where Lillard might end up in terms of his overall value if he does end up in Miami. And I think he's probably going to be somewhere maybe between 10 and 15. I don't know exactly what you think, but he'd be playing with obviously Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, and we know how many games Jimmy Butler misses, and when he does, Damian Lillard will still have a ton of usage and put up some big lines. So if we knew right now that he was staying in Portland, he'd be probably in the tier above. But yeah, that, I guess, trade request that's hanging over his head just does make the decision a little bit more difficult when you get to that end of the first round. And LaMelo Ball, like you said, I think he's being underrated as well. He had that fractured wrist in his rookie season, played 75 games in his second season, and then last year just couldn't get that ankle right. Had multiple injuries to that ankle before they packed him away for surgery. So I think he's really good value sort of at that back end of the first round, and I've probably got him at 8 at the moment, with Steph Curry probably slightly just ahead of him.
Yeah, I've got him. I took him at 9 in a mock draft the other day, but yeah, I wouldn't really have a hesitation necessarily going into 8. I probably would. He's putting 8 and 9. Depends on what you want to do with Giannis in that area, but I think that's fair enough to have those guys all grouped together. I think Lillard probably, if he is in Miami, again, it depends on so many other factors, but he probably doesn't change a huge amount. I think you're right that he maybe drops a tier into tier 4, and he possibly moves into that Yeah, 15 to 19 sort of a range would be my guess. But again, it's really hard to know that without knowing how everything's going to shake out. Now, in my Durant tiers, actually, or Durant rankings, Lillard and Ball are actually up in tier 1. So that was a little bit of an interesting thing that got thrown up there while Curry and Haliburton were in tier 2. So the same top 5, just a little bit of a different order in that grouping. And Lillard and Steph are not particularly strong as points league guys either. They're more tier 3 sort of points league guys, second round guys. If we go to tier 4 now, we've got a couple of players here. Trey Young and James Harden. Both of these guys are being drafted in the second round. Trey, lowest ADP, or actually the lowest, highest, I don't know what I'm going to say. He's in the 20s on Yahoo, but in the teens on the other sites, and same with Harden. So Yahoo drafters are more skeptical of both of these players. It doesn't, the Harden one is, we just don't know what's happening with him, but the Trey one's interesting because it's not going to take a huge amount. People will say, well, Trey was 50th last season. It doesn't take hardly anything for him to be back at 10th, really. Like, I think that he is very solid in that second round. And like LaMelo Ball, people just hate Trey Young for whatever reason that they hate him, and he gets dinged significantly. It's not going to take a huge amount for him to get back into this area or even higher, I think.
No, and I tweeted out a couple of weeks ago my sort of top 8 when I had Curry and Ball in there, and a few people questioned the Ball pick, and I said that next group, which contains, your James Harden, your Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, Anthony Davis, there are concerns, Damian Lillard as well. There are some sort of concerns around each of them. So maybe by default, Trey Young just does come up into that sort of late first round conversation just due to the elite level points and assists that he brings. And we know how hard those two categories are to find later on. So I wouldn't be surprised if, people do shy away from those other players and we do see Trey Young's ADP come up more into that, like I said, maybe 10 to 14 range around the turn there. And James Harden, again, we just have no idea what's going to happen, if he's going to be in Philly, play in Philly, or be shipped off elsewhere. So hopefully we get a resolution before draft season.
Yeah, look, I think wherever Harden goes, it probably is going to be somewhat of a hit to his value. How much of it, I don't know, but I do think there'll be somewhat of a hit. But he's also shown over the last 2 years that he can withstand a hit in usage, which he did in Philadelphia, and still put up really good numbers. So maybe it's not as big of a hit. Who do you think takes a bigger hit if they are traded? Is it Harden or Lillard?
Completely depends where they go. I think probably on the surface, Harden. Like, I just don't know who trades for James Harden. Like I said, if Lillard ends up in Portland, like, he's still in a pretty good situation because they're going to have to give up some pieces to get him, and that might impact their depth. And like I said, with Jimmy Butler missing games, maybe Damian Lillard still is a top 10 player. James Harden, not as convinced. Like, the assist will still be there, but maybe the scoring comes back a little bit. But yeah, it's all hypotheticals at this stage and really hard to tell.
It is really hard to tell. Like, we just don't know. Like, we don't know how things are going to pan out because we just don't know how. It's never just about the guy joining another team because pieces have to move all over the place and you never know who's leaving, who's coming, who's going, and how all that stuff pans out. So we've got James Harden and Trey Young in tier 4. But even within a tier here, Matt, like, this isn't really accounting for a level of safety or security. Like, I'd probably feel more comfortable drafting Trey Young in this spot versus drafting James Harden just because we have more idea of what is actually going on with him. But in 3 weeks' time, we might reassess this and Harden sits there perfectly equivalent to what Trey is, or he's in a situation where it's actually better for him and he sits a spot ahead. I think that is possible as well.
Yeah, absolutely it is.
In terms of where they sit in my other rankings, I've got Harden as a tier 3 guy. Trey is actually a tier 4 player. A few other guys jump ahead of him in those Durant rankings, which we'll get to again. We'll explain them another day. But just ideas that things do change. Tier 5, Devin Booker. We've got him listed as a point guard. Matt, people are going to tell you that actually Shams said that Bradley Beal is their point guard, so what are you doing? But I think as a Suns fan, and I know as someone who watches basketball, that Devin Booker is their best passer and their best playmaker, and he's going to have the ball in his hands quite a bit. And I think, I don't care what Shams says, I think that Booker is the point guard.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see that tweet and that report and not exactly sure where that came from, but yeah, in my mind, Devin Booker's the point guard, like you said, the best playmaker, the best passer on the team. Beal and Durant will spend time on the ball, but Devin Booker will be the primary lead ball handler there. Cade Cunningham potentially could have dropped him down a tier, but I'm really bullish on Cade again this season. Was high on him last year. I think he's just going to have a breakout season, and potentially this time next year we're talking about him as a first-round draft pick. But the pieces that they're slowly starting to put around him, a full season, hopefully, with no injury concerns. But yeah, you're probably going to be able to get Cade potentially a round or half a round later than Devin Booker, and I think that's excellent value.
Yeah, look, I think Cade and Booker, they're two guys that I have as players that have got a chance to become first-round guys. Obviously, we're not taking them in the first round, like that would just be silly to do that. But I do think that if we're looking at guys who've got that ability to perhaps jump up and be that surprise first-round guy, like all the ingredients are there for someone like Cade Cunningham. If he averaged 26, 6, and 7, 1.3 steals, 2.4 triples, 46, 85 on 6 attempts from the line, like you're there. That's already the 10th best player. And that's not insane for him to do it because he rebounds, he gets assists, he can get steals, he can hit threes, he can get to the line, he does hit free throws. He just was a really poor shooter last season. So it is possible for him to get there. But look, that's a gigantic discrepancy in that ADP. And that's, I think, a great illustration of what we're talking about with tiers here. It's like we've got them relatively similar, these two guys, but we're talking 25, 30 spots difference in their ADP. Cunningham 44 on Yahoo, Booker 17. Now, I don't actually have too much of a problem with Booker at 17. It's just getting Cade at 44 feels like it's a pretty good deal, I would say.
That's a steal. Yeah,
it is, which is what we're always trying to get in our drafts, is trying to find those steals and trying to extract that extra value in a lot of drafts and trades and waiver wire moves. Let's look at tier 6. A little bit busier, this one. We've got 3 players in it: Fred VanVleet, Jamal Murray, Darius Garland. A fairly large discrepancy as well in some ADPs. Fred going as high as 21 on Yahoo, Murray going as low as 51 on Fantrax. And I guess people will be a little bit surprised to see these guys positioned together. VanVleet is going to hurt you a lot in field goal percentage, and if you're willing to sacrifice that is going to jump him up quite a bit. Garland probably needs to get back a couple of assists away from Mitchell. But I think it's fair enough to have all these guys here. I'd probably lean maybe VanVleet pushing somewhat higher, maybe it's like a tier 5.5, and you push him ahead with Cunningham and Booker. Do you have any worries? Because I know people have said, well, Ime Udoka said, well, there's an open competition, anyone can get minutes. I don't think that really applies to VanVleet, but do you have any worries about what his role is? It is sometimes hard to join a new team and maintain the same level of production.
Yeah, I mean, potentially, and that is a small concern, but and potentially, it's an extra. It's 1 or 2 minutes less than he was playing in Toronto, and therefore the usage drops a little bit as well. But he's still going to be a strong source of assists, steals, and threes. Like you said, that field goal percentage is always an issue. And Jamal Murray and Darius Garland, just extremely well-rounded, reliable point guards. I do wonder if Jamal Murray will get overdrafted a little bit based on the Nuggets championship performance last season, and people will know the name and think, oh yeah, Jamal Murray, won the championship. He's a good player. I'm going to draft him a little bit earlier than maybe he should go. And Darius Garland, just like I said, just super reliable, well-rounded, won't hurt you anywhere. Like I said, an extra assist or 2 would be good, but Donovan Mitchell's there now, and Garland's a great pick for roto leagues as well with his efficiency.
Yeah, Garland's still really young. He's like 23. He's got plenty of room to grow with these. And the thing you mentioned with VanVleet's really important is that he was playing, 2 years ago, played 37, 38 minutes a night. He was down to 36 last year, but if he plays 34, now Udoka did play Tatum and Brown quite a few minutes, but there are a lot of options here, like Kevin Porter. There is Amen Thompson, who knows how much he plays, but Kevin Porter can still play some point guard. So it's not like VanVleet is going to have to play 38 minutes a night in Houston, which is going to be an impact. To me, he's probably, him and Murray are probably, and Garland, they're tier 6 points league players, but there are some guys that we haven't covered who are better points league guys, like Ja Morant's probably a tier 3 if on a per game basis. Jaylen Brunson's probably a tier 5 points league player, and Darren Fox similarly as well. We haven't covered those guys yet for category leagues. In fact, we might be getting to, no, we're not. We're actually not. Tier 7, Matt. Drew Holiday sits there by himself, ADP 38, 44, 43, sitting there by himself in tier 7. Tier 7 feels like it should be pretty low down the list, but we're only talking end of the third round here. What's the selling point on Drew Holiday for this upcoming season?
I don't know if there's a selling point as such, because last season he took on those extra responsibilities with Chris Middleton missing a large chunk of the season. So I think we should expect a slight step back from that production. But if he can return to something similar in his 2021 and 21-22 seasons, I think that would be a really good outcome. A top 40 season is still on the cards. Maybe they do sit Giannis a little bit more with his knee concern, and Brook Lopez as well. I don't think he can do what he did last season with the amount of playing time and the run that he had with no injury. So Drew Holiday is still a very, very good and reliable fantasy player.
Yeah, I think he's probably in a similar tier 6 for points leagues as well, along with Garland and Murray and VanVleet that we spoke about. You're right in terms of we talked Booker and Cunningham earlier about their ability to pop off and jump through that tier, and even VanVleet to a degree. I'm not really sure Drew's got that. It's probably more of a safety pick if you went a little bit higher upside in some of the earlier rounds. He's probably more likely to drop than he is to rise, but I wouldn't say that he's overly likely to drop off from this position. Tier 8. Two guys, Jaylen Brunson, Darren Fox. And there'll be two names that people go, well, that's ridiculous. Why are they so low? Because their ADPs, Jaylen Brunson, bang, in the middle of the third round on Yahoo, 32. Darren Fox, 31 on Fantrax. These are really early picks for both of these guys. What's the level of skepticism for both of these players? Because I share that some similar level of skepticism on these guys. What are we concerned about with these two?
I don't have any real concerns with Jaylen Brunson. He had that massive season last season in New York, his first one there. So, can he keep up that level of production? I think he can. He was a really good scorer, good efficiency as well from a point guard. So I don't see any reason why that field goal or free throw would drop off at all. The steals around 1 per game, the assists are nice, the threes are nice. He just does a lot of good things in good areas. And De'Aaron Fox, the issue with him in terms of his overall value has always been his free throw percentage. He increased that last season.
It still was negative, wasn't it? I'm pretty sure it was.
And that was the thing. It was 78%, but it was on 6 attempts and a career high, but it was actually still a negative Z score. So, you do need to factor that in. But, again, the elite scoring and the assists that he does bring does need to give him a little bit of a boost. And I don't really believe in the ADPs at this time of the year, because they're very much tied to the rankings of those sites, which does skew things. So not to say a bad word about them, but I do put little weighting into the current ADPs of players.
Look, I in this area, round 3, round 4, I don't actually dislike these picks that much, especially in a points league. I think there's some real value. I think they're both probably tier 5 to tier 4 points league guys, a little bit higher than this sort of level. My worry, I guess, a little bit with Fox is, does he maintain that level of shooting? Because it was crazy. I don't know that it stays there. When you are absolutely 100th percentile, there's only really one way you can go, and that's down. And that gives me some worry there with him, plus the free throws. But he's still going to be really, really strong. And Brunson's lack of defensive stats is somewhat of a concern. He also shot, I think, 45% from 3 over the final 50 games of something of the season. So another one of those ones where you go, well, maybe the only direction that can go is down. Tier 9. You will notice that we had a bunch of guys there, which are probably all top 50 players. We're 8 tiers in. That's the way that point guards run. These next group aren't top 50 players. Tier 9, Marcus Smart, Chris Paul, Ja Morant, all their ADPs well outside that area. Apart from, for some reason on ESPN, Ja Morant's got an ADP of 27, which, I don't know, I'm not even going to try to explain what's going on over there, because there's no reason for that. Yes, if Ja Morant wasn't suspended 25 games to start the season, in a points league, that is absolutely a totally viable position to pick Ja Morant. He is going to be probably a top 15 points league guy, but he's going to miss 25 games minimum, and who knows what he's going to be like when he returns. So that is a very curious ranking there. Interesting to see Smart and Morant together, because Smart's going to be boosted early and they drop off a little bit late. And the Chris Paul one's really interesting to me, Matt. I want to focus a little bit on him. I don't know whether he is going to start. I think he's probably leaning more towards him not starting. But the question is going to be, is he 32 minutes a night like he was playing for your Suns last season, or is he 27 minutes a night? Because that's a huge difference. 27 minutes a night, Chris Paul, is maybe not top 100 draftable.
Well, it's funny you should say that because I've got a bit of a hot take on Chris Paul if you would like to hear it, Josh.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I don't think there's any way he's playing 32 minutes a night. I think it's probably in that mid to high 20s maybe to start the season. But I've got real concerns that come, let's say, February, that again, yes, Chris Paul is out of the top 100 and he's not even standard league relevant, for the fact that he will be probably rested, potentially be injured by then. And I just think the consistency just isn't going to be there. There will be nights where he puts up, 12 or 14 points and 8 or 9 assists, but then the next game might be 6 points and 6 assists, and then he'll have a night off. And I just have a gut feel that his strengths won't be worth rostering him, and he won't have that consistency to be on a roster for any period of time. If he's on the waiver wire, he'll be a spot start guy and he'll be a streamer guy for assists. But just like Russell Westbrook last year, his weaknesses weren't worth the hassle and worth rostering. So that's my concern with Chris Paul this season.
Yeah, look, the other thing, I thought you were going to go this direction as well, is that he might be on a different team. He might not be playing for this team. He might be salary dumped somewhere else to get another asset in for the Warriors, and he goes to a team that just goes, just sit down for a couple of months here, Chris. Like, come over, we'll buy you out. Maybe you come to another team and play 20 minutes. Again, similar to the Westbrook situation from last season. I think that I didn't really think of that as an option until I did my Warriors preview. We Locked On Warriors, and he's like, most likely player to trade. He's like, mate, I think it might be Chris Paul. I'm not sure he's actually here to be a part of the team the whole way. And if it doesn't work out, they'll use him the way that they flipped D'Angelo Russell to try and maintain the salary slot to get somebody else in that might be able to help him. And I went, oh yeah, because it is a weird fit, him and Steph, and how that all works, and playing extraordinarily small the whole time. How does it all work? And if someone's getting moved, it's going to be Chris Paul. So we'll see how that all works out. These guys, like Ja Morant, is probably a tier 3 points league player if he wasn't suspended, and Smart and Paul are much lower. That does bring us to the question, though, on Ja, Matty, is where do you pick him? Like, what is reasonable enough for you, knowing that he's missing minimum 25 games? So max he can play is 57. You cut out the couple of weeks of the season at the end where you're not even playing fantasy in general. So look, does he get 45 games in? Does he play 40 games? Is that, and for a guy who's not a good category league player as a general rule, I don't think you can do a top 75 pick on him.
I was starting in that range. I think probably, I was going to go maybe 80, 90 range. And like you said, those 25 games to start with, then do the Grizzlies sort of ease him back into it? Like, I can't see him
they did it last year, didn't they?
Playing 30 minutes a night or 35 minutes a night. It might be 28 and then 30. And then, does he sit it back to back? Or, what's his conditioning like? Does he have another ankle injury or where it comes? So, are you going to get, like you said, 40 to 45 good games out of Ja Morant this season? That's the big question. And you're probably going to need multiple IR spots because, like you said, you're going to be without him for the first, month to 6 weeks of the season.
Yeah, he's back in November, I think. I've got the date somewhere.
November,
I'm going to have a look of when he's actual due back. But this is not like he's a top 20 player. He's not a top 20 player. Like, he has so many deficiencies in a category league. And last season when he went to Florida for his wellness retreat, he came back and played off the bench limited minutes for a little bit of time anyway. And now he's missing 25 games. It's just, this is not a top 20 guy that's just going to fly back in. Like, he might best, someone said, if you pick him at 50, it's fine because then you have a stud rolling for the playoffs. But that's his value in the playoffs, like 50. It's around that area. It's not that much higher. And you got to deal with zeros. And if you're in like a Yahoo public league, he doesn't actually qualify for IL because, again, they're stupid and they don't have IL plus as a default. But he doesn't qualify for regular IL. So you're just stuck with a zero on your bench until when he comes back, which is actually the 19th of December is the first date that he's due back. Can you deal with that? I don't know. And I don't want to do that with my first 4 picks. So that makes it really, really tough to make that decision. So I think 75 is a good cutoff, but I'm not even sure I'd do it, to be honest, because he's not. Is it actually worth that when he comes back? In a points league, sure. Category league, I don't know. I don't know what happened there on that screen. That's gone weird. I'll have to work out that in 1 second. So I don't know what actually happened there. That's some weird stuff that processed wrong. But what we missed out on was a tier 10 is Marquel Faze, who sits alone there in tier 10 at the moment, which I think is fair enough. A lot of people have some concerns on Faze, but I've heard a lot of people going even aggressively the other way. Man, he's going to be this great guy. I've got to get my team. He's going to win leagues for me. I'm not really sure that's 100% true, but he is in a weird position. I am not overly concerned, and by overly concerned, I'm not really concerned at all about Anthony Black or Cole Anthony taking away minutes from him. They clearly run better when Fultz is out there playing 30 minutes a night.
I'm a little bit the same, but that backcourt is still just feels so crowded with Marquel Fultz, Jaylen Suggs, Cole Anthony. It's like you said, throw Anthony Black, their rookie, into the mix. Gary Harris is still around. They've got Joe Ingles, not that he's going to play a real lot, but it just feels a little bit too crowded in my liking. They probably want the ball in Wagner and Paolo Banchero's hands more as well. So, I mean, Fultz is still fine if you want some assists and steals, but I just worry a little bit about his ceiling, and I'm not convinced he's a top 50 player.
I don't think he's a top 50 player. I think he's in an interesting spot here. I don't know. I probably would, I think, have him more pushed down into this group of guys in tier 11, which I'm going to talk about in a second. I think he's got value, and I'm not really worried about those guys. But then the way that Paolo Banchero is playing over at the World Cup as a backup center as well makes it very, because that's really their hole, is because Mo Wagner's their backup center. So if Paolo can play some backup center, that opens up more minutes for those guards to play together a little bit more versus being really constrained and squished in. It enables some lineups with Harris, Suggs, Fultz all together, or Anthony, Fultz, and Suggs playing together, just because you've got Franz at the 4 and Paolo at the 5 now. I think that enables a little bit of that. It's a weirdly constructed team for sure. Tier 11, though, we did reference it already. We might as well get into it now. Derek White, Josh Giddey, Ben Simmons, Trey Jones. Big differences in ADPs here. Simmons is a guy that you can get very, very late. I do think he is going to start, but who knows what we're going to get out of him. I think he's an amazingly good late pick, Matty, understanding that he's going to be bad at free throws and he's not going to score very much. But I think when you're getting him in this spot, well, it's free. It's free money, whatever you're doing with him.
Yeah, it is. I'm still not convinced I will draft him because of the free throws. But Josh Giddey for me is the standout in this range. The strong rebounds from a guard position, the strong assists. Will be interesting to see how his scoring goes with Chet Holmgren and another step from Jalen Williams as well. I'm not really buying into some of the Derek White hype either. I just wonder where his production is going to come from behind Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Kristaps Porzingis. And then Trey Jones, we assume he's going to be the starting point guard in San Antonio. And like we saw last season, he's a good late round guy if you need a boost in assists.
Yeah, we do assume that he's going to be the starting point guard there. Maybe Campaign pushes him. Maybe Jeremy Sohan gets some minutes there. Look, out of that, I agree with you on White. I'm a little skeptical on him returning the value that some might think. Giddey's an interesting one because he lacks defensive stats and the free throws can be a real problem. And we've seen through FIBA, he's getting to the line more. And the more you get to the line, the more of a problem that becomes. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about tiers and overall value, that can impact stuff quite a bit. I would clearly, though, out of this group, pick Josh Giddey ahead of these guys. And in fact, I probably would almost definitely pick him ahead of Marquel Fultz as well, I think, at this stage. But it's why you're discussing values and ranks is a real tough thing when we're talking fantasy, because there are just so many different factors to consider. And Giddey, as you can see, is going to go here in round 6 or round 7 in most cases. I'm not sure that he's got upside to improve. Well, that's not true. He's 20. He's not even 21. But given the team construct, where does he take it from where he was last season is the big question, I guess.
Yeah, I think, and he's really going to need to improve that 3-point shot, with those other players around him. And we know how many draft picks OKC have coming up over the next few years as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see which of those core players they keep and which get shipped out over the next couple of years as these draft picks are coming through.
It takes us to tier 12, and you'll see Trey Jones' brother Tyrese there. Now, people will think that he probably should be pushed ahead of Trey. I know people will have that argument, and because they'll this is what will happen, Matt, and this is where you run into problems, is that they'll look at what he did last season when Ja Morant was out. Look at his numbers as a starter. That's a top 50 player. And while those numbers are true, like he did put up those numbers, the thing that you have to understand is that he was replacing Ja Morant. He was replacing Ja Morant's usage and Ja Morant's ball handling. And in Washington, yes, he's the starter, but he's not the number 2 offensive guy. He is behind Jordan Poole and behind Kyle Kuzma and maybe behind Corey Kispert in that lineup. And he's not in a situation where he's replacing Jordan Poole. And because in that lineup it was Desmond Bain and sometimes it was Jaren Jackson and then it was like Roddy or Brooks or guys like that. Like he wasn't in a situation where he was in a situation where he was really the only guy that could pass and was getting a little bit of usage. But Jordan Poole's going to run everything, really, I think, in Washington. And that means that Jones is not going to, I don't think, maintain the same level of assist rate that he had when he replaced Morant. And good luck getting a sniff of the ball when Kuzma and Poole are out there. So while it seems great that he's going to be a starter, and it's a definite increase in minutes, it doesn't just transport everything straight across.
Yeah, it's a good point, and we know that Tyus Jones has never been a strong scorer. We've got him projected for about 13 points per game, which is a negative in that category. The field goal percentage has always been questionable, which again drags down his overall value. So it's a good illustration of grouping players of similar overall value, but obviously these players, and like we saw in the last year, have certain strengths and weaknesses, and this is like I said, the point of the draft where you really need to be moving players up and down depending on how you want to structure your team. And what you've done earlier on in the draft might dictate who you take out later depending on their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, always. It's just really important to understand that what you've done before and how that impacts what happens later. The other two names there, D'Angelo Russell and CJ McCollum. McCollum's got obviously the highest ADP here, 64 over on ESPN, which is pretty crazy to me. I don't really know how he's able to maintain anywhere near that value if Zion and Ingram are healthy. And then there's ascension of Trey Murphy, Dyson Daniels maybe getting a little bit more. I really think that both CJ and Russell are at pretty significant risk of losing a lot of what they did last season.
Yeah, and CJ's finished 44th, 52nd and 63rd in per game value over the last 3 seasons, so slightly declining. So again, if you're taking him hypothetically in the 70-80 range, are you going to get a return on investment at that spot? Maybe, but you're probably also looking for someone with a little bit more upside, potentially like a Josh Giddey, or if you think Derek White's going to have a breakout, those sort of guys in that range.
Yeah, there's no excitement in those guys where you have to take them. There's so much more value in other spots, and Reeves and Vincent can take minutes away from Russell, and CJ. Who knows? Do they play Zion at point guard at times? So there's a possibility of all those things happening. Of course, so much of it revolves around these guys being healthy, but I just would not want to. CJ's really giving me Valanciunas vibes from last season, where I've got no interest in taking him around that ADP, and that's why we've pushed him back here into tier 12. Now, the last tier we look at is tier 13. There's 3 guys there: DeAnthony, Melton, Mike Conley, Emmanuel Quickly. That ADP data is absolutely incorrect because it's the one from the other one, so just ignore those numbers. Having some technical difficulties today. Not a great day at all. But these are all guys you're looking at in your last couple of rounds. Conley's an interesting one. There's almost no upside with him. I would suggest that I'm not sure how high the upside is for the other 2 guys either. Quickly's fine, but they brought in another guard in DiVincenzo. And Melton, you might think that, and I talked about this with Mitch on his show earlier today, that if Harden gets traded, that means Melton's going to get big minutes. Does it? Is Daryl Morey trading James Harden and not getting anyone back? I don't think that's going to be the case. Now, I guess you could say that if Harden doesn't get traded, then he sits out or fakes an injury or whatever, then Melton's minutes go up. That's possible. But he's also a weird one where he's a low-scoring player who gets a ton of value through steals and had an opportunity last season, and it's really going to be up to what Nick Nurse thinks of him. Because if Nick Nurse doesn't like him, then he's not getting the minutes. Simple as that.
Yeah, and we saw, like I said, we saw that early last season when Harden was out, and the Sixers rolled out DeAnthony, Melton, and Shake Milton, the 2 M&Ms, and I think there was a stretch there where Melton had more value. Like you said, Melton's value was basically coming from his steals and threes and the defensive numbers. Again, not a strong scorer, and like you said, if Harden gets moved, you'd think that the Sixers are getting something back and another piece to potentially put in that backcourt. So Quickly, nice player from the bench. Probably, in my opinion, was probably sixth man of the year last year. Had some nice scoring games and a boost in free throw percentage if you need that. And anytime Brunson misses games, you probably want to go and add quickly off the bench. But yeah, not a real lot of upside, like you said, with these three. So we'll find you some more value in some of the other positions.
Yeah, getting point guards early is important. It's hard to find these sort of guys that can come in and contribute. Just the Shake Milton thing reminded me of something I looked at the other day. So I've been doing some work, Matt, on looking at week-to-week production and totals over a week and that sort of thing. Shake, you mentioned he had a really good run at things. How high do you reckon Shake Milton ranked in one of those weeks that he put up? Like he had his rankings. Like week 1 he didn't play at all. Then he was 306th in week 2 and 291st in week 3. 268 in week 4, 168 in week 5, and then week 6 was the big one. How high do you reckon he got in that week?
I know he was pretty high because I remember tweeting something about him and Melton's value over a stretch of X amount of games. And I think off the top of my head, again, across that span, Shake Milton was probably top 20 or 30. So I'm going to guess 20-ish.
This is based on the totals for the week, right? He was, in week 6, he was the 3rd ranked player, which is literally insane. Like he went from 306 to 3rd in 5 weeks, and then it was 120th, 229th, 196, 179th, and then fall back to the 300s later on in the season. So he had this massive hot streak for these couple of games and went bananas and then just disappeared again. And now he's on a different team. So we don't know what's going to happen there. But it is, again, this is a common pattern, Matt, that we see at the end of drafts, round 13. It's really not, it's hard to find a point guard, an upside sort of guy. Maybe it's Colin Sexton you take a look at. Maybe, like, is Kevin Porter even considered a point guard? Like, who knows where he fits in? There are a lot of different options you can go. And as always, as each round goes on, the differences between the players get smaller. And, a guy that goes in round 11 versus a guy that might be 180th, who cares? Like, the differences are so small that it's very easy to have differing opinions on a lot of these players. And then you sort of want to just go, well, where am I getting some minutes? Where am I getting some usage? Where's the opportunity that's arising with these players? And that's how it can get a little bit tough. Matt, that is the end of our point guard tiers show. Hopefully tomorrow when we do shooting guard tiers, the technical difficulties aren't as prevalent. I hope I get it sorted out. Fingers crossed. I think we'll be good. Matt, tell everyone what's going on for you over at Twitter, what they can follow you, and what's happening at Basketball Monster.
Yep, follow me on Twitter, X. I don't even know what it's called anymore, but I'm at SMan Sports. Basketball Monster will have, center tiers will be out probably by the time this is gone live or pretty close. Then we'll do overall ranking tiers, and then we'll get into some other juicy stuff, which I'll tell you about when we do some more positional tiers over the next couple of days.
There you go. Well, we'll talk about all of that coming up. Matt, we're going to do shooting guards tomorrow, so I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thanks again for coming on and talking about the point guards.
Anytime, mate. You go and get a good sleep.
All right, so apologies for those technical difficulties on the screen there and some of those things that just didn't work out. Also, there were some issues I was having behind the scenes with some of the ranking stuff with my Durant ranking system, some of the points tiers. It didn't work. It wasn't presenting as well as I wanted it to, so I sort of stopped talking about it, so I apologize for that. I will go back and talk about this all in a separate show later on, so I'll probably do a show on individual points league tiers and talk more about the Durant stuff later on. So I was going to do it, and then some stuff just screwed up in the background. I didn't want to keep Matt for the whole time to try and fix it, so that's what happened with that, so I do apologize. Follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app and on YouTube. Thumb it up and leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.